So, beginning of endocrinology. One of the funnest, most interesting topics that you'll ever discuss. It's a complex system, yet a simple system, like very basic mechanisms. It's just really straightforward as how it works. So the best way to compare it is to, to start off with it, is to compare it against something that we're already aware of, the nervous system. So if you remember the nervous system, it's very fast. You got an electrical signal going down the axon. It really just needs a single signal that's sent down, and it's short-lived. In order to get it to redo its thing, you have to resend an action potential, and it does its thing. At the very end of it, in order to communicate, you can either just be a direct synapse with the next neuron, which is kind of rare, but most of the time it's releasing neurotransmitters into a very small space called the synaptic cleft, and each neurotransmitter elicits a different type of response, whether it be positive response or a negative response. It all just depends. And the only thing that it abides to, or it does, a single neuron will just choose one target. Usually, just one target. If it's going to bind onto a muscle, it's going to bind onto that muscle fiber. If it's going to bind onto an adrenal gland, it's going to bind onto the adrenal gland. If it's going to do, you get the idea. It's not widespread. One neuron's not going to hit multiple tissues or multiple organs. A nerve might, a neuron won't. The endocrine system is a little bit different. It has chemicals being released from glands or tissues. How it works, it's a lot slower. You're literally pouring something into a liquid and hoping that it gets down to the bottom. That's like you could try calling somebody, with the nervous system, it's like trying to call somebody in New Orleans from Chicago, and you're going to get there pretty quick. Or you could throw a bottle in the water and hope that it finally makes it down the Mississippi. It's a lot longer. It takes a little bit longer. Now, the benefit of it, though, of being a slower signal, is that the signal, the effect that it has, can last a lot longer. It can last for seconds. It can last for days, whereas a single firing of a neuron, it's there to the brain and back in 0.1 seconds. 0.01 seconds, 10 milliseconds. So it does that by releasing it into the blood system, just like you're dropping the the bottle or the message in the bottle in Chicago and hoping that it gets down via the mighty Mississippi down to New Orleans. Now, anyone can receive this signal as long as they're receptive to it. You want to be affected by insulin? The cell better have an insulin receptor. You want to be infected by a thyroid hormone or some other type of hormone, a growth hormone, you better have a receptor for it. If that cell doesn't have a receptor for it, it's pretty much just as if the growth hormone, the signal just isn't there. So quick comparison, remember, neurons use electricity. It's faster, short effect, and specific targets, while the endocrine system only uses chemicals, It's a lot slower, but it can last a lot longer. And it targets or affects any cells that decides, hey, I want to be affected by that hormone. So before we dive into endocrinology, we do need to talk about the 4 different types of glands, the 4 different types of ways to expel stuff from a cell. You got the exocrine, you got autocrine, paracrine, and endocrine. You might notice this guy from a little meme about worrying. What you're going to be worrying about is that he is an exocrine, that sweat that's coming out of his face. The liquids that are entering into your intestinal tract is considered an exocrine. There's some type of liquid release is being released by an exocrine gland or an exocrine tissue. These are not hormones. These are just things that go out, eventually releases stuff that eventually goes out into the wild, whether it be really straightforward like sweat, maybe takes a little longer like spit, or something that's in your digestive tract that takes maybe a day or two to work its way out. Now let's move on to the other ones. Autocrine auto means self. So really it's just a cell saying, I really need something to happen. but no one else is doing it for me. So they release a signal, and that signal just come right on back itself and stimulate what it wants. Paracrine is like a neighbor. Somebody sets their house on fire, it's going to alert everyone all the way around. Paracrine is just there helping out a nearby target. It's not going anywhere anytime soon. An endocrine gland would be something that releases its contents into the blood, where it will affect distant target tissues. So that could be like the anterior pituitary gland, something up in your brain, releasing a liquid that you hope that your muscles down in your toe are going to have an effect with. So there are different types of glands and tissues. You'll notice that I keep on saying glands or tissues. There's a reason why I'm saying that. Well, glands are things that their main and only role is to release hormone. So that would be your pituitary gland, which is stuck in your cranial cavity. You got your thyroid gland, you got your parathyroid, your adrenal, and your pineal gland. The pituitary and pineal gland we've covered very briefly already. We'll probably visit that just one more time really quick. Now, tissues, however, usually have a different function other than just being an endocrine. For instance, the pancreas. Pancreas releases insulin, glucagon, somatostatin, and other things. Those are all endocrine things, signals being sent out into the blood. But the pancreas isn't just limited to that. It releases stuff out into the digestive tract. It releases a buffer, releases digestive enzymes, and other things that we will talk about in AMP4. Other things that things can do that are a type of tissue is a liver, the small intestine, your testis, ovaries, kidneys, stomach. Your heart surprisingly has somewhat of an endocrine function. Shouldn't say somewhat, it does. As well as your thymus. So what's the purpose of a hormone? Really, it's just to maintain that balance. You gotta have balance. You don't want too much of it or too little of a thing. You want it just right. You're too hot, let's cool you down. You're too acidic, your blood's too acidic, let's get that more towards where blood should be. Now, how the hormone is transported depends on how it looks. Some of you might be familiar that some of the hormones are lipid soluble, meaning that they have to be they really like fat, while others are water soluble, and they really like water. There's some pulls and takes and gives and takes for all those benefits and drawbacks. A couple of examples of your lipid-soluble hormones is your steroid hormones. So you got aldosterone, the sex hormones such as testosterone, estrogen, progesterone. Vitamin D is considered a steroid hormone. Something to point out really quick, when somebody refers to somebody taking steroids to enhance their abilities to do things, it's a misnomer. It's a misuse of a word. Some of them the things that they take are steroids or a steroid hormone, but it's not the entire genre of steroids. There is another one called the thyroid hormone. You take a look-see at that. You can see somewhat as to why it's a fat-soluble thing. Those rings here really dislike water. These guys right here just absolutely dread water. Gases are also it's its own class, really. And nitric oxide is there to help dilate blood vessels throughout the body, including that of the male penis, which causes erection. Moving on, we got the water-soluble hormones as well, aka hydrophilic. They really like water. And you got your norepinephrine, which is your fight or flight chemicals. Histamine, your achu, your making you sick. Well, not sick, but making you have your allergic reaction when it overreacts. Melatonin, your sleepiness, and serotonin, your happiness. But You will notice that they do have different, if they're an endocrine type of effect rather than a nervous type of effect, they are released in different places than what we are used to. And we also have the peptides and proteins. So you could have a simple modification of an amino acid, or you could actually have yourself a Merry Little Christmas. Why did I even add that? A Merry Little Protein right there. And voila, c'est magnifique. Lots and lots and lots and lots of your hormones are peptide and protein based. You also have something called an eicosanoid. And this is your prostaglandins. This is the stuff that makes inflammation possible. Now, here's the problem. Water soluble, it kind of makes sense how water soluble hormones are going to move. Blood's mostly water, plasma's mostly water, so they're going to move just fine. They're going to move through the blood vessels just fine. They don't need any help. The only thing is, though, is because it's water soluble, a receptor on the outside has to exist, because that hormone isn't sneaking into that cell anytime soon. Well, that means it has a less direct effect on the actual formation or activation of a DNA strand and formation of protein. So it just, a very large cascade usually follows after a water-soluble protein hormone. Now the drawback for a lipid-soluble is, well, again, blood is mostly water, plasma is mostly water. How are you going to move a lipid-soluble hormone that hates water in water? Well, you're going to put it on a transport protein. So you're going to have to your body forms an extra little transport protein to move those hormones. Benefit is, though, when it's released, it can easily just pass right on through this little outer layer of the cell, which is a phospholipid, aka, well, a fat, lipid-soluble substance. It's going to pass right on through that membrane, no problem. Where it can go ahead and interact with the nucleus and have almost a direct effect on DNA and create the proteins that it actually wants and have the response that it wants rather quickly. So how do we regulate this stuff? How it works. So hormones traveling throughout the body only affect, again, those target cells. The receptors are continually being synthesized or broken down. Synthesized means being made. So it's being made or broken down. If the cell doesn't really want too much of an interaction with a hormone, it's going to remove a lot of its receptors, aka downregulate it. If it really, really wants some type of help from a hormone, it's going to upregulate the amount of receptors that are available. Downregulate, don't want too much interaction with the hormone. Upregulate, we desperately need help with this hormone, from this hormone. An example of a downregulation that y'all are probably familiar with is type 2 diabetes. Somebody that consistently eats sugar after sugar after sugar every day, or maybe they just have some type of genetic issue, or maybe a combination of the two. What happens is these cells are going, okay, we're being overstimulated, we don't need this much sugar, it's time to pull out these receptors. So they start pulling away the GLUT receptors, they're called, that interact with insulin. And because those cells aren't pulling sugar out of the blood anymore as much, that sugar levels start to rise quite high. So, as you probably can tell and probably have divined, because y'all are smart, one hormone's not the only, there's not just one hormone always in the blood system. It's usually a concoction. You got lots of hormones coursing through your body. Now, what they do in combination or by themselves, they can cause synthesis of new molecules. They can change how a cell responds. And for instance, an insulin receptor is going to make the cell more permeable to sugar and pull in more sugar. It could also help the transport of those substances in and out of the cell, pretty much the same what I just said, as well as making certain or upregulating metabolic processes such as building up things, anabolism, or breaking down things, catabolism, which we'll talk about more in AMP4. So how they respond, how these cells respond, depend on a lot of things. The hormone concentration is one. If you have, for instance, estrogen, in order to develop a follicle or an egg, when estrogen starts out really low, the production of estrogen starts out really low, which has an inhibitory effect. It doesn't make them grow very well. It stops the production, or at least tries to stop the production of estrogen. But when estrogen gets really high, the reverse comes true, and it becomes overstimulated, and estrogen gets overstimulated even more, which produces those eggs great. Number of receptors, reflect back again on insulin. If you have, and type 2 diabetes, if you have a lot of receptors, a lot of sugar is going to go into those cells. If they get overstimulated, they get pulled away. 1 or 2 receptors are still there, insulin's going to bind with them and let sugar come in, but not at the same rate. Other things that would affect outside or indirect effects on those cells as well, they could also be paired up with other hormones, coming back to the idea that multiple hormones are in your blood. They could be working together, synergistic, or they could be working against each other, antagonistic. Remember, antagonists are the guys that are, or gals that are always against each other. Synergistics are people that are working together. Here's an example of an antagonist. So calcitonin, hopefully remember from AMP1, will actually push calcium and phosphate into the bone. Parathyroid, its main goal is to pull calcium from the bone, to make blood calcium levels good. So it's going to pull calcium where it can, from the bones. An example of a synergist is this. Remember that parathyroid hormone really wants blood calcium to be fine. If you don't have enough blood calcium, you're going to have some irregular heartbeats, you're going to have some bad neural issues, it's going to go bad. There's another hormone called calcitriol, aka vitamin D, that will pull calcium from your diet. So get out there and eat and drink your milk and get out there and out in the sun. Finally, we're coming to the tail end of this small video. So, and there's a couple, and we're going to end off with a positive versus negative feedback loop. Negative feedback loop is this. Signal sent, hey, this is happening. And the control center says, okay, well, let's fix that. It sends out some type of cell signal. We're going to ignore increased ACTH. It sends out a signal. It says, okay, we're going to make this sugar. Let's say, it sends out, sorry, I apologize. We're just going to send out a signal. It's achieved. We finally get the response that we want. Okay, it's time to shut off. We can apply that for sugar, for insulin. And sugar levels start to rise. Gets a little high in the blood. The hypothalamus says, okay, we got, or the hypothalamus says, okay, we got enough sugar going on here. We need to start pulling it into the cells. So insulin is stimulated, and insulin pulls sugar out of the blood, and it starts, that sugar levels start dropping quite nicely. They say, okay, we don't want to lose too much sugar, so it's time to shut off insulin, and insulin shut off. So I gave a little bit of a diagram right here. It's sort of hopefully helpful to get this nailed down. So a stimulus happens, hey, something's wrong, let's fix it. You pull on the string, which is a response, and you get your feedback. The hammer says, yep, you're done. When you pull on the string, the pulleys work, the hammer comes down crashing on your head, and you're not going to pull on that string anytime soon unless you need it. The positive feedback is a hormone's going to say, go out, and then say, hey, we need more of the same hormone, and it's going to keep on building up higher and higher concentrations. How I could relate that is via 2 psychological analogies. Analogy number 1, Pavlov's dog. somebody says, oh, you did such a good job, and they give you a cookie, and you're like, yay, I love cookies. You're more likely to do that job again, and you get stimulated, and you do more work, and they give you another cookie, and yay, you do even more work, etc., etc. Another psychological analogy is the sadist-masochist relationship. Sadist likes giving pain, masochist likes taking pain. So for instance, an example in the body is the giving birth. A hormone called oxytocin comes along. Yes, you do need to know oxytocin. Oxytocin comes along and causes the uterus to contract a little. Once the uterus contracts a little, it causes the baby to push down on the cervix. Cervix stretches and goes, hey, I really like that. Let's have some more. So the stretching comes back up to the brain and says, hey, that was great. Let's do some more. So more oxytocin comes out and more uterine contractions happen and the cervix gets dilated a little more and goes, hey, this is nice. We should have some more oxytocin. And the whole process continues more and more. The contractions get closer and closer. Cervix becomes dilated to a point, and then finally, baby's born. Baby born. Effect is achieved, placenta comes out, voila, c'est magnifique, all is well. Yay! With that, that is the end of this particular video. We did talk very basics of endocrinology. Remember that endocrine is slower. You got endocrine, exocrine, autocrine, paracrine effects. They could be water soluble, they could be lipid soluble. You could have try to remember which one has a direct effect on, almost a direct effect on DNA versus the one that does not, as well as understand the difference between positive and negative feedback. Thank you and have yourselves a lovely day.